I will translate and adapt the story for you, replacing Portuguese elements with English ones, while maintaining the core narrative. You get 15 pounds, Mum? My son sneered, confident he would inherit the 160 pounds million left by his father. I just waited in silence. When the solicitor turned to the next page, his face paled. I stood before the imported mahogany coffin when I felt my son's hand shove me. It wasn't a gentle touch, the kind you expect at a wake. It was a deliberate, calculated push, strong enough to make me stumble on the low heels I'd worn for 20 years. Get out of here, Mum. You've played your part. David's voice cut through the murmur of condolences like a rusty blade. 67 years of life, 42 of marriage. And that was how my only son treated me on the day I buried Augustus. Right there, in front of businessmen in Italian suits, neighbors who pretended not to see, distant relatives who came more for the buffet than for memories. I didn't cry. Not at that moment. I looked at the coffin where Augustus rested with that serene expression he never had in life. And I wondered if he knew. If from wherever he was, he saw the monster we created together, or rather, the monster he created while I held together a home that never gave me credit. Bruna, my daughter-in-law, leaned against the back wall of the hall, wearing a black silk dress, a neckline bordering on disrespectful for a wake, and fake nails red as dried blood. She smiled when our eyes met. It wasn't a smile of consolation, it was a smile of victory. And it was at that exact instant that I understood. They had already divided everything, the inheritance, the properties, the cars, the bank accounts, everything, as if I were just an administrative obstacle to be circumvented. The hall smelled of white lilies and hypocrisy. Those giant flowers Augustus hated, but which David insisted on ordering because they conveyed an image of success, 140 wreaths. I counted each one as people paraded with their empty condolences. Your lady was an exemplary wife, Mrs. Teresa. Exemplary. That word haunted me my entire life. Exemplary in the kitchen. Exemplary in raising her son. Exemplary in remaining silent when Augustus came home at 3 a.m. smelling of whiskey and cheap perfume. But at that wake, as my son pushed me and my daughter-in-law smiled, exemplary became synonymous with invisible. The ceremony was quick. Augustus wasn't religious, so the vicar was brief, professional, efficient, like someone completing another daily task. David spoke. He talked about his visionary father, the brilliant businessman, the man who built an empire from scratch. He didn't mention my name once, not even when listing the important people in his life, nor when thanking everyone who supported him. 42 years, erased in 12 minutes of a rehearsed speech. When they lowered the coffin, David threw the first rose, Bruna threw the second. They waited for me to approach, but not to comfort me, to ensure I wouldn't cause a scene. I approached slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze fixed on my back. I threw a daisy. Augustus hated roses. At the cemetery exit, as people dispersed towards their imported cars, David caught up with me. He was accompanied by the family solicitor, Mr. Davies, a gray-haired man with thin glasses who always greeted me with a bow that seemed genuine. Mum, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is the will reading. Don't be late. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. I spent that night alone in the house I had shared with Augustus since David was 3 years old, a house too large for one person, full of rooms that accumulated memories like dust. I sat in the living room armchair, the moss-green velvet one I bought in an antique shop in 1995, and let the silence swallow me. Was it worth being exemplary? If you want to know how a lifetime of sacrifice can be erased in seconds, subscribe to the channel, because this story is just beginning, and what comes next will draw gasps of indignation from your throat. Mr. Davies's office was on the 12th floor of a mirrored building in the city center, the kind that reflects the sky and makes you feel small just by looking at it. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always had in my life. Punctuality was one of the few things my mother taught me before she died. A woman who respects herself doesn't make anyone wait. The receptionist, a young woman with hair too straight to be natural, offered me coffee. I accepted. But the cup trembled so much in my hand that I had to rest it on the saucer. It wasn't fear. It was contained anger, the kind that ferments in your chest and rises through your throat like bile. David arrived 20 minutes late. He entered the office like someone invading conquered territory, broad shoulders, occupying more space than necessary. Bruna followed, balancing on golden stiletto heels that clicked against the marble floor. She wore sunglasses indoors, as if still in mourning, or as if she wanted to hide her eyes from those who calculate every move. "Good morning, Mum." David's voice was mechanical, formal, the kind you use with a bank teller. I didn't answer. I just watched as he slumped into the leather chair beside me, spreading his legs in a way that invaded my space. Bruna sat on his other side, crossed her legs, and started fiddling with her phone. The screen's glow illuminated her face at angles that made her seem even more calculating. Mr. Davies entered last, carrying a worn brown folder. He greeted me with a respectful nod. Then he looked at David with an expression I couldn't decipher at the time. Today, looking back, I know exactly what it was. Pity mixed with contempt. "Well, let's begin." Mr. Davies adjusted his glasses and opened the folder with slow, almost ceremonial movements. The will of Mr. Augustus Henry Davies, drafted at the registry office on March 15th of this year, 3 months before his passing. 3 months. Augustus knew he was going to die. The pancreatic cancer had come quickly, but not without warnings. And in those final 3 months, he had made decisions. Mr. Davies cleared his throat and began to read. I, Augustus Henry Davies, in full possession of my mental faculties, declare my last wishes. David tapped his fingers on the table, an irritating, anxious rhythm, like someone waiting for a prize announcement. Bruna put down her phone and leaned forward, finally paying attention. To my beloved wife, Teresa Alice Davies, I leave the sum of £15,000 deposited in a current account, in addition to the residential property located at Acacia Avenue, number 342. The world stopped. £15,000. David's laughter exploded like a gunshot in that glass-walled room, a loud, mocking laugh that made the receptionist outside lift her head. He slammed his hand on the table so hard that the solicitor's pen rolled to the floor. £15,000. £15,000. David turned to me, his eyes gleaming with that mixture of triumph and cruelty that only an ungrateful child can possess. Mum, that wouldn't even pay for Bruna's fake nails. What on earth did you do to Dad's head for him to leave you such a pittance? Bruna let out a sharp giggle, covered her mouth with her red-nailed hand, and whispered something in David's ear. He laughed again. Mr. Davies remained impassive, the paper still in his hand, as if waiting for the circus to end. I felt every word of that laughter penetrate my skin, like glass shards. £15,000. 42 years of marriage, of washing clothes, of preparing dinners for investors who barely spoke to me, of holding Augustus's hand in the early hours when he woke up sweating because of the debts that almost led us to bankruptcy twice. All that was worth £15,000. The house, at least he had left the house. And as for the rest of the assets, David didn't even wait for Mr. Davies to finish. He snatched the paper from the solicitor's hand with a brusque movement. Let me see that, sir. David, please. Mr. Davies tried to retrieve the document, but my son was already reading aloud, excitement dripping from every syllable. To my son, David Augustus Davies, I leave the entirety of my companies, shares, commercial properties, financial investments, and vehicles, totaling an estimated net worth of £160 million. £160 million. Bruna jumped up and hugged David, screaming as if she had won the lottery. He lifted her off the ground, spinning with her in the middle of that mahogany and glass office. I remained seated, my hands clasped over the synthetic leather bag I had used for 8 years, watching my son celebrate as if I weren't there, as if I had never existed. You know what this means, love? Bruna ran her hands over David's face, that whiny voice she used when she wanted something. We can buy that penthouse in Miami and change the car? I've always wanted a convertible Mercedes, and we'll have one. David kissed her neck right there in front of the solicitor, and in front of me. Anything you want, princess, anything. Mr. Davies slowly, meticulously put the papers away, without looking at anyone. He closed the folder, adjusted his glasses, and finally looked up at me. There was something in that look, a silent message I couldn't comprehend. Mrs. Davies, you need to sign some documents to formalize the transfer of the house to your name. Can we schedule that for next week? Before I could answer, David interrupted. Actually, doctor, about this house. He sat down again, now with the posture of a businessman, someone accustomed to making decisions. What's that property worth on the current market? My stomach dropped. It's a residence in a desirable neighborhood with 500 SQM of land. I'd say something around £2.5 million, Mr. Davies replied in a neutral voice. £2.5 million. David stroked his chin thoughtfully. Then he looked at me like someone evaluating an old object, deciding whether to keep it or throw it away. Mom, don't you think it's too big a house for you? Alone at your age? And if something happens, who will help you? The concern in his voice was so false it was offensive. David's right, mother-in-law. Bruna approached, touching my shoulder with those fake nails. I wanted to rip each one off. We could find you a smaller, more practical apartment, or maybe one of those retirement homes. There are some lovely ones, you know, with nurses, activities, a care home. She was suggesting a care home. I looked at my son's face. I searched for some remnant of the boy I cradled when he had colic, whom I taught to walk, to read, to tie his shoes. I looked for the boy who cried on my lap when his school friends excluded him. I looked for some spark of humanity. I found nothing. Just the distorted reflection of a man who had learned from his father that love is measured in figures, and that I, in his eyes, was worth no more than £15,000. I'll think about it. My voice came out firm, surprising even myself. I got up from the chair, picked up my bag, and walked to the door. Mr. Davies accompanied me to the corridor. Before entering the lift, he leaned in and whispered, "Mrs. Davies, don't sign anything without talking to me first. Nothing. Do you understand?" I understood, but I still didn't know why. I would only find out when it was too late for David to turn back. The days that followed the will reading were like living inside an emotional freezer. David didn't call me again. Bruna no longer feigned kindness. It was as if I had officially become an item crossed off their life's priority list, but the house remained mine. For now, I knew they would return. People like David and Bruna always come back when they want something. And the following Thursday, exactly at 11 a.m., the doorbell rang with that irritating insistence of someone who won't be ignored. I opened the door and found them both. David wore a charcoal gray suit I had never seen, certainly bought with his newly inherited money. Bruna wore a beige linen ensemble and carried an executive folder as if she were there on business. They were indeed. "Hi, Mom. We need to talk." David entered without waiting for an invitation. His Italian leather shoes marked the wooden floorboards I had polished the day before. Bruna followed him, her French perfume permeating the living room air in a sickly sweet way. I closed the door slowly, mentally counting to 10, a technique I had learned in decades of swallowing insults. "Sit here, Mom. This is important." David pointed to the sofa, my sofa, as if he owned the house. I sat on the edge, spine straight, hands on my lap, a posture my grandmother said was for a woman who doesn't easily bend. Bruna opened the folder and spread papers on the coffee table. Floor plans, property valuations, brochures for compact apartments in neighborhoods I had never heard of. "Look what we brought for you." Her voice was too sweet, the kind of sweetness that precedes poison. Lovely apartments, furnished, in secure complexes with 24-hour security. This one even has a games room for seniors. She pushed a colorful brochure towards me, a square, characterless building with tiny balconies and a pool the size of a bathtub. The kind of place where people go to silently disappear. "We're thinking of your well-being, Mum." David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, that posture of someone about to make a generous offer. "You'll be much more comfortable in a smaller place. No stairs, no garden to care for, no worries about maintenance." "And this house?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well," David exchanged a quick glance with Bruna. "We were thinking of selling it. The market's hot. It's the perfect time. With £2, £5 million in your pocket, you'll live like a queen for the rest of your life. £2.5 million that would go straight into his account. Of course. And what if I don't want to sell?" My voice came out calm, almost curious. David's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. Bruna stopped flipping through the papers and stared at me with those calculating eyes. "Mom, be reasonable. His tone changed, becoming harsher. You're 67, alone. This house is huge, expensive to maintain. And if you fall, if you get ill, who will help you? I have neighbors. I have friends. Friends? Bruna let out a dry giggle. Mother-in-law. With all due respect, but most of your friends are either dead or in a care home. You need to be realistic. Each word was a polite slap. David sighed, ran a hand through his slicked-back hair, and changed strategy. He got up, started walking around the room, touching objects, as if taking inventory. He stopped in front of the rosewood sideboard that belonged to my grandmother. These old things here. He rapped his knuckles on the dark wood, the sound echoing hollowly. They're worth a fortune, you know? Authentic rosewood furniture. Must be about 80 years old. 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds easy. My heart tightened. That sideboard had been Grandmother Matilda's. It passed to my mother, then to me. I used to polish that wood every Sunday, conversing with the memories it held. Technically, Mum. David turned to me, hands in his pockets. Everything in this house belonged to Dad, and now it belongs to me. The house is yours, but the contents, well, that's part of the inheritance. I felt the floor collapse beneath my feet. You can't be serious. I'm being practical. He shrugged, as if explaining basic maths to a stupid child. You don't need so much, and I need to liquidate assets to invest in the business. Dad left the companies, but the working capital is short. Bruna got up, ran her hand over the Austrian crystal chandelier in the dining room. This here, for example, genuine crystal, 120 years old, must be worth around 4,000 pounds, 5,000 pounds. We can sell it and buy you a modern lamp, much more practical. They were serious. They were going to empty my house, rip out every memory, every piece of history I had built. Tomorrow, a team of appraisers will come. David was already heading for the door, as if the matter was closed. They'll catalog everything of value. Don't worry, Mum. We won't take your personal things, clothes, photos, those things. You can keep them. How generous. Bruna blew me a kiss in the air. That empty gesture women make when they want to seem affectionate, without actually touching the other person. Think carefully about the apartments, all right, mother-in-law? We only want what's best for you. And they left like that, leaving papers scattered on my table, the smell of expensive perfume lingering in the air, and a black hole where my mother's heart should have been. I stayed there, sitting in the heavy silence that settles after a storm. I looked at Grandmother Matilda's sideboard, at the chandelier my mother had bought when she got married, at the linen curtains I had hand-sewn 30 years ago. 42 years in that house. Every corner had a story, every object was an anchor of memory, and my son wanted to liquidate everything as if it were expired shop stock. That's when the doorbell rang again. I got up slowly, my legs shaky, expecting them to be back to rip out another piece of my dignity. But when I opened the door, I found Mrs. Miriam, my neighbor, with a hot cornbread cake in her hands. I saw those two leaving here looking like vultures over carrion. She entered without ceremony, placed the cake on the kitchen table, and stared at me with those sharp eyes of someone who has lived a lot and learned to read people. Tell me everything, Teresa, and don't spare the details. And I told her. For the first time since Augustus died, I opened my mouth and let everything out. The humiliations, the 15,000 pounds, the plan to put me in a tiny apartment while they sold my life wholesale. Miriam listened in silence, cutting generous slices of cake that neither of us touched. When I finished, she took off her glasses, cleaned the lenses with the hem of her blouse, and said the phrase that would change everything. Teresa, I was a solicitor for 40 years before I retired. And what your son is doing smells of coercion. Did you sign any power of attorney? Any papers they gave you? No, not yet. Excellent. Don't sign anything, and give me Mr. Davies's phone number now. Miriam took my phone and dialed. She spoke to the secretary, identified herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. She scheduled a meeting for the next day. Just me and the solicitor. Something's wrong with this story, Teresa. She handed the phone back. A man like your Augustus wouldn't leave his wife like that after 42 years. Something wasn't said at that will reading, and that's when the first spark of hope lit up in the dark. maybe I wasn't as alone as David imagined. Maybe there was still a card up my sleeve that no one had turned over. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the double bed that seemed too large, without Augustus beside me, looking at the ceiling where a damp patch formed the shape of a bird with open wings. Augustus always said he would have it fixed. He never did. Memories came in waves, the kind you can't control. 42 years pouring over me like cold rain at dawn. I met Augustus in 1983 at a college graduation ball. I was 25 and in my third year of architecture, the first in my family to reach higher education. My mother took in laundry to pay my tuition. My father had died when I was 12, leaving only debts and a gold wedding ring my mother never took off. Augustus was starting in real estate. He had a rusty blue Beetle, 3 patched suits, and an ambition that wouldn't fit in his chest. He looked at me across the crowded dance floor and said the boldest phrase I had ever heard in my life. "You're going to marry me? You don't know it yet, but you are." And I married him 6 months later, in a simple ceremony at Street Rose's church, with a single-tier cake and a borrowed dress from my cousin. My mother cried with joy. "You did it, daughter! You found a hard-working man." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I canceled my university enrollment 2 weeks before the wedding. Augustus had secured a plot of land in partnership with another associate. He was going to build his first building. He needed help with the paperwork, the calculations, the basic architectural plans. "It's just until the project gets off the ground, Teresa. Then you can go back to your course." I never went back. 3 months after the wedding, I discovered I was pregnant with David. Augustus opened a bottle of cheap wine and toasted to the man of the house. It never crossed his mind that it could be a girl, and it wasn't. David arrived, a red, wailing boy who cried every night as if angry at being born. Augustus's first venture was a failure. His partner disappeared with the money, leaving only debts and a labor lawsuit. I remember holding David, 3 months old, breastfeeding him while watching my husband cry, sitting on the floor of the empty living room. We had sold the furniture to pay the solicitor. I failed, Teresa. I'm a failure. I could have agreed. I could have gone back to my mother's house, asked for help, resumed my studies, but I looked at that broken man on the floor and made the decision that would define the next 40 years of my life. Get up. You haven't failed. You've stumbled. Now get up and try again. And he got up. With my support, with my secretly saved money, with my grandmother's jewelry that I sold without telling anyone, we managed to pay the most urgent debts. Augustus started over, this time alone. Small plots of land, affordable housing, tight profits. I took care of David, the house, the bills, the taxes. I did the spreadsheets by hand, checked every invoice, negotiated deadlines with suppliers, using that sweet voice that disarms men accustomed to shouting. When David started school, I began to work in earnest. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare meals in advance. I took the boy to school at 7 a.m., spent the day in the makeshift office we set up in the guest room. I picked up David at 5 p.m., prepared dinner, helped with homework, put him to bed, and when I finally lay down, Augustus would arrive smelling of beer and fatigue, wanting to talk about projects. I slept well about 10 times in those first 10 years. The first big turning point came in 1995. Augustus secured financing to build an 8-story building. It would be his largest undertaking yet. But midway through the construction, the contracted builder went bankrupt. Half the building was ready, half the buyers wanted to withdraw, and the bank threatened to execute the debt. I remember sitting at that same kitchen table, David, 12 years old, playing video games in his room, when Augustus said, "It's over, Teresa. I'll have to declare bankruptcy." I was 37, my hair starting to gray, my hands chapped from washing dishes and ironing. No degree, no career, no money of my own. Just a wedding ring on my finger and a son who was starting to look at me with the same contempt I saw in his father's eyes. But I didn't let Augustus give up. I called every one of the buyers. 32 calls. I explained the situation. I promised we would finish. I asked for just 6 more months. 28 accepted. 4 withdrew, but we found new buyers. I went to the bank alone. I used the house as collateral without telling Augustus. I secured a deadline extension and an additional loan. That building was delivered late, with difficulty, with sleepless nights, but it was delivered. And the profit? £300,000 at the time, a fortune, allowed Augustus to finally take off. He thanked me that night, took me out to dinner at an expensive restaurant, held my hand across the table, and said, "You are the foundation of everything, Teresa. Without you, I am nothing." I believed him like a foolish woman in love. I believed him. But David was listening. He was 12 years old and heard his father say that. And you know what he commented on the way back home? "Dad exaggerated, didn't he, Mum? You just stay at home. He's the one who really works." Augustus laughed, ruffled the boy's hair, and said, "Clever boy. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct him. He just laughed." And it was there in that car, returning from the restaurant, that I understood. No matter how much I did, no matter how much I gave, I would always be invisible. The woman in the background, the one who supports but doesn't shine. The following years were an escalation. Augustus built more buildings, bought land, opened a development company. Money started to come in, and the more it came in, the less he was at home. Meetings, business dinners, trips to conventions. I stayed home taking care of David, who grew increasingly arrogant, taking care of the house that grew larger and emptier, taking care of a loneliness that no expensive furniture could fill. When David turned 18, he announced he was going to study business administration. Augustus celebrated, already planning for his son to take over the businesses. When I suggested he study architecture, my unfulfilled dream, David looked at me with pity. "Architecture is for women, Mum. Men do business administration." And Augustus nodded in agreement. My son graduated, joined his father's company. He met Bruna at a graduation party. She was a public relations professional, all made up, all calculated. They married quickly. Augustus paid for the party. 300 guests. Seafood buffet, honeymoon in Paris. I wasn't consulted about anything. I just paid the bills, organized the suppliers, chose the flowers. At the party, during his speech, David thanked his father for everything he was. He didn't mention my name. It was that night I understood. I had created a monster. Or rather, I had let Augustus create a monster while I fed the beast with my silence. And now, 42 years later, lying in that empty bed, looking at the bird-shaped damp patch on the ceiling, I wondered, how much is a dedicated life worth? £15,000, according to the will. But something told me that Augustus, in the end, had seen the error. 3 months before he died, he had seen who his son really was, and had done something about it. I just needed to find out what. The team of appraisers arrived the following Tuesday, exactly at 9 a.m. 3 men in white coats and clipboards, accompanied by David and Bruna, who entered my house like polite invaders. I was having coffee in the kitchen when I heard the key turning in the lock. My key, the one I had given David years ago for emergencies. He had never used it until now, and now he used it without even ringing the doorbell. "Good morning, Mum." His voice echoed down the hall with that false cheerfulness of a door-to-door salesman. "I brought the appraisers I told you about. It wasn't a visit, it was a territorial invasion." I got up from the table slowly, smoothing the apron I had worn since the 90 seconds, faded blue plaid, with a patch on the pocket I had made myself. I walked to the living room and found the 3 men already measuring the walls, photographing the furniture, noting numbers I couldn't understand. Solid mahogany, manual carvings, Louis XV style. One of them, the oldest, with a gray mustache, spoke as he ran his hand over the display cabinet that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Excellent state of conservation. The antique market is paying well for pieces like this. Bruna was sitting on my sofa, fiddling with her phone, legs crossed as if she owned the house. She wore a velvet tracksuit, the kind that cost more than my entire salary when I was still working, helping Augustus. Mother-in-law, "You don't mind if I get some juice from the fridge, do you?" She didn't even wait for an answer. Got up and went straight to the kitchen, opening cupboards, rummaging as if looking for something other than juice. David pulled me into the corner of the room, away from the appraisers. "Mum, relax. They're just going to catalog. We're not taking anything today." The tone was condescending, the kind you use with a stubborn child. "But I need you to understand. Dad left the estate to me." These furniture pieces, these antiques, are part of the estate. These pieces were from my family. My voice came out firmer than I expected. The sideboard was Grandmother Matilda's, the display cabinet Great-Grandmother Clara's, the chandelier. And Dad paid for the renovation of this house when you got married. David interrupted me. Technically, everything here was acquired during the marriage, which means community property, and since he was the provider, he left the phrase hanging, as if the rest was too obvious to explain. Provider. That word again, as if 42 years of holding things together didn't count as provision. The appraiser with the mustache approached, holding the rosewood sideboard with almost religious reverence. Madam, this piece here is rare, Brazilian rosewood, probably 1,940 seconds. Original carvings, bronze handles, it's valued at least £8,000 in specialized auctions. £8,000. Grandmother Matilda had received that sideboard as a wedding gift. My mother kept her hand-embroidered linen towels there. I kept family photographs in a secret drawer only I knew about. Wonderful. David clapped his hands, rubbing them together like someone closing a good deal. Note it down. This one goes to the Sotheby's auction. Sotheby's. My grandfather, who was a carpenter and died illiterate, would have the furniture he built with his own hands sold in an international auction house. And this chandelier? Another appraiser pointed to the Austrian crystal chandelier in the dining room. Genuine Swarovski crystal. 120 years old. 15 original pendants. Estimated value between £6,000 and £10,000, depending on the buyer. My mother had saved for 3 years to buy that chandelier. It was her dream to have something fine in the house. She died without ever having dined beneath it. She passed away 2 months before its installation. I lit that chandelier every Sunday and pretended she was there, sitting at the end of the table, smiling proudly. That one goes too. Bruna appeared with a glass of orange juice, giving her opinion as if it were her right. We'll buy a modern light fixture for you, mother-in-law. LED. Economical, much more practical, efficient, modern. Words that erase history. The appraisers continued through the house like ants cataloging a colony. They photographed the bedroom dresser, Riga pine that my father had given my mother as a wedding gift. They measured the Venetian mirror in the hallway, an inheritance from an aunt I never knew, but whose story my mother told every time we passed it. They even valued the kitchen wall clock, the pendulum one that marked the hours with a metallic sound that calmed me on sleepless nights. All this together should fetch £50,000, £60,000 easily. The chief appraiser announced after 2 hours of inventory. There's a guaranteed market. People pay very well for other people's sentimental memories. Other people's sentimental memories, as if mine were worth nothing. David signed the appraisal papers with a Mont Blanc pen, another new item bought with his dead father's money. He put the copies in his executive folder and turned to me with a smile that was meant to be comforting, but only seemed predatory. Mum, next week I'll send a lorry to pick up the pieces. I'll leave you the basic furniture. Bed, sofa, table, the essentials. He touched my shoulder, and I needed all the self-control in the world not to pull away. And with the sale money, I'll deposit £1,000 a month into your account, in addition to the £15,000 Dad left. You'll see, you'll even have some left over. £1,000 a month. He was going to sell £60,000 worth of memories and give me £1,000 monthly as alms. And there's one more thing. Bruna approached, holding a silver photo frame that was on the shelf. It was my wedding photo. Augustus and I, young, smiling, full of future ahead. This is sterling silver, isn't it, mother-in-law? Must be worth about £1,500. She started to take the photo out of the frame. Something inside me broke. No. My voice came out low, but firm as reinforced concrete. Bruna stopped, the photo still in her hand, looking at me with surprise, as if she didn't expect a piece of furniture to speak. What do you mean, no, Mum? David frowned. They're not taking that. I snatched the photo frame from Bruna's hand with a quick movement that surprised even myself. Neither Grandmother Matilda's sideboard, nor my mother's chandelier, nor anything that has my family's history. Mum, you're being irrational. Irrational. My voice rose for the first time in 42 years of marriage and 20 years of anticipated old age. Irrational, is both of you entering my house without permission. Irrational is inventing that you have rights over things that are mine, by blood inheritance, not by stamped paper. The silence that settled was heavy as molten lead. The appraisers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them started putting away his clipboard, signaling he wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. David took a step forward, his jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. I recognized that expression. It was the same one Augustus made when contradicted, the same one that preceded shouts, table thumps, slammed doors. "Are you going to obey me?" He spoke slowly, each word weighing a ton. "Because I own this inheritance. And if you don't cooperate, I have very good solicitors who will prove in court that this furniture is part of Dad's inventory. Then prove it." I heard my own voice, but it seemed to come from someone else. Someone tired of being trodden on. "Go to court, bring your solicitors, but in the meantime, nothing leaves this house without my authorization, and I do not authorize it." Bruna scoffed, rolling her eyes. "David, let's go. Leave your mother with her sick attachment to her old things. We'll sort this out with Mr. Davies." They left, slamming the door. The appraisers quickly followed, relieved to escape the battlefield. I stayed alone in the room, still holding the silver photo frame, trembling from head to toe. Not from fear, but from rage. 42 years of swallowing insults, accepting crumbs, being the exemplary woman who never complained. But there was a limit, and they had just crossed it. That same afternoon, Mrs. Miriam appeared at my door with a thermos of coffee and that determination of someone who doesn't accept no for an answer. She was 70, with short white hair, red-rimmed glasses, and an erect posture that defied gravity and time. I saw the circus they put on here this morning. She entered without ceremony, went straight to the kitchen, and poured 2 cups of coffee. "3 men in lab coats, your son leaving looking like he bit into iron. Tell me," and I told her everything. The appraisers, the furniture, the humiliation of seeing my own history priced as second-hand goods. Miriam listened in absolute silence, only nodding at the right moments, her eyes attentive behind thick lenses. When I finished, she took off her glasses, cleaned them with the hem of her blouse, a habit I already knew, meaning she was processing important information, and looked at me seriously. "Teresa, there's something very wrong with this whole story. Very wrong." She tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. "I was a solicitor specializing in family law for 40 years. I've seen everything. Husbands hiding assets, children forging wills, spouses being manipulated. But this here," she pointed at me, "this here smells of coercion and financial abuse. But the will was read by Mr. Davies. It's legitimate. It was read." I didn't say it was read in full. Miriam got up, started walking around the kitchen, as she did in court when building a line of reasoning. "And tell me something, was your husband the kind of man to leave his wife of 42 years of marriage in the lurch like that?" I thought. Augustus was many things. Absent, workaholic, sometimes insensitive, but unjust, completely unjust. No. He knew how much I had sacrificed. He had said it at dinner after I saved the venture. "You are the foundation of everything." I didn't answer, my voice coming out firmer. "No? Then why would he only leave you 15,000 pounds? Miriam slammed her hand on the table, making the cups clatter. "It doesn't make sense. Unless what? Unless there's something more in that will. A conditional clause, a second page, an addendum that Mr. Davies didn't read in front of your son." My heart pounded. The phrase the solicitor had said in the hallway flashed back into my mind like lightning. "Don't sign anything without talking to me first." "Nothing." He said not to sign anything. I muttered, more to myself than to Miriam. "Who said that?" "Mr. Davies." After the will reading, he pulled me into the hallway and told me not to sign anything without talking to him first. Miriam clapped her hands once, loudly, like someone who had just solved a riddle. There, I knew it. She took my hand with that surprising strength of someone who had spent a lifetime closing deals and exposing lies. "Teresa, that man knows something you don't know, and your son doesn't either. That's why the insistence on making you sign papers, sell the house, put you in an apartment. They want to neutralize you before you find out." "Find out what?" "We'll only know that by talking to Mr. Davies now." Miriam was already reaching for the phone. I tried to protest, to say it was late, that we could wait until tomorrow, but Miriam was not a woman to wait when she smelled injustice. She called the office, identified herself as Dr. Miriam Fonseca, solicitor for Mrs. Teresa Davies. A half-truth she turned into a fait accompli and demanded an urgent meeting. 20 minutes later, we were in her car, a impeccably maintained 2010 Corolla, heading downtown. Mr. Davies's office was empty at that hour, almost 6 p.m. The receptionist had already left, but he was waiting for us personally at the door. His jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened, the air of someone who had spent the entire day in exhausting hearings. Mrs. Davies. He shook my hand with both of his, a gesture that conveyed urgency and concern. I was expecting you to show up. Please, come in, doctor. He greeted Miriam with the respect of someone who recognizes a professional colleague. He led us to the meeting room, carefully closed the door, and, before sitting down, checked that the windows were tightly shut, as if about to reveal a state secret. Mrs. Davies, I'll be direct because we don't have time to waste. Mr. Davies opened a locked drawer from which he took a sealed folder with a notary's seal. Your husband contacted me 3 months before he passed away. He discovered something about your son, something serious. I felt the air leave my lungs. What did he discover? Mr. Davies opened the folder with precise movements. Inside were documents, bank statements, copies of contracts, and, my God, photographs. David had been siphoning money from the company for at least 5 years. He spread the documents on the table like a detective presenting evidence of a crime. False contracts with phantom suppliers, doctored invoices, transfers to shell accounts. He alone diverted approximately £8 million. £8 million. Miriam picked up one of the statements, ran her finger across the line of numbers, whistled softly. This is a crime. Embezzlement, falsification of documents, money laundering. Exactly, Mr. Davies took off his glasses, rubbed his tired eyes. Augustus was heartbroken when he found out. He hired an independent auditor and confirmed everything. He thought about reporting it to the police, but he couldn't. It was his son, his only son. So, what did he do? My voice came out trembling. He changed his will. Mr. Davies took a sealed envelope from the folder. My name was written on the front in Augustus's shaky handwriting, that handwriting that had worsened in the last months of his life. But not a simple will. He created a clever, very clever conditional clause. Miriam leaned forward, sensing the legal strategy. What kind of clause? A behavior clause. Mr. Davies opened the envelope, revealing 2 typed pages. In the first reading, I only read the first page, the one that left £15,000 to Mrs. Davies and the rest to David. But there is a second page, a page that can only be read if certain conditions are met. What conditions? I asked, barely able to breathe. The clause states the following. If my son, David Augustus Davies, demonstrates, within 30 calendar days of my death, unworthy, disrespectful, or abusive behavior towards his mother, Teresa Alice Davies, as documented by the testamentary executor, the entire inheritance shall be fully reverted to her, with the son receiving only the symbolic sum of £15,000, the same I initially allocated to the mother. The silence that fell over that room was so heavy I could hear my own heart beating erratically. Augustus did that? I barely managed to form the words. He did, and he appointed me as testamentary executor, with powers to document David's behavior during this 30-day period. Cameras, recordings, witnesses, everything is valid. Mr. Davies slid a small device across the table. A digital recorder. I have recorded every interaction, the will reading where he laughed at you, today's meeting with the appraisers who invaded your home. Miriam picked up the recorder, her eyes shining with that satisfaction of a solicitor who had just found definitive proof. How many days have passed? 23. Mr. Davies looked at me intently. 7 days left, Mrs. Davies. 7 days to document your son's character, and from what I've seen so far, he gathered the documents, closed the folder with a definitive gesture. I think we already have more than enough material. I looked at that folder. Inside it was redemption, proof that I was not invisible, that my sacrifice had not been in vain, that Augustus, in the end, had seen the truth. But there was also my son's sentence. And as much as he deserved it, as much as he had humiliated and disrespected me, he was still my son. And that hurt more than any inheritance could heal. Miriam prepared chamomile tea when we got home. She said it was to calm my nerves, but I think it was more to have something concrete to do while I processed the bomb that had just exploded in my life. I sat in the same kitchen chair where I had had coffee 1,000 mornings in a row, where I had helped David with homework, where I had cried secretly when Augustus forgot my birthday, and now I discovered that in the end he had tried to fix everything or destroy everything, depending on the angle. You need to understand something, Teresa. Miriam placed the hot cup between my hands. Augustus didn't do this out of cruelty. He did it for justice. And more importantly, he gave you the power of choice. What choice? My voice came out choked. To leave my son in misery. 15,000 pounds isn't misery. It's a lesson. She pulled her chair close to mine, held my face with both hands, forcing me to look at her. Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you, because this is important. You are not destroying your son. He destroyed himself when he chose to steal from his father, humiliate his mother, and think he would get away with it. But he's my son. And you are his mother, not a doormat. Miriam's voice was firm but affectionate. Being a mother isn't accepting abuse. Being a mother isn't allowing your son to turn into a monster without consequences. Sometimes, the greatest proof of love is letting someone fall so they learn to stand up on their own. I drank the tea in silence, feeling the warm liquid go down and heat the cold emptiness that had settled in my chest. Miriam was right. I knew she was. But knowing didn't make the decision less painful. Mr. Davies said, "There are 7 days left," I said, more to myself. 7 days until the clause is activated. What happens if they find out? They won't find out. Miriam crossed her arms, her strategist mode activated. You'll act normally. If David calls, answer. If he shows up, receive him. Let him continue to hang himself with his own rope. I don't know if I can pretend. You don't need to pretend. Just be yourself, the woman who survived 42 years of invisibility without losing her dignity. Miriam squeezed my hand. If you falter at any point, call me. No matter the time. She slept in the guest room that night. She said it was too late to drive, but I knew it was to keep me company, to ensure I wouldn't crumble alone under the weight of that truth. The next few days were the strangest of my life. David called twice. Once to say he had sorted out the furniture issue with the solicitor and I didn't need to worry. Another time to inform me he had found a perfect apartment for me in a retirement complex. It has a games room, Mum, and crochet classes. You'll love crochet, as if I were a senile old woman only fit for knitting. I swallowed my anger, thanked him politely, and hung up. Miriam, who was beside me, took notes in a small notebook. Day 25. Son attempts to coerce mother into accepting unwanted apartment. On Thursday, Bruna showed up unannounced. She brought brochures for care homes, luxury assisted living residences, and a smile as fake as her gel nails. Mother-in-law, look how lovely. It has a heated pool, 24-hour nurses, a cable TV room. She spread the brochures on the table as if presenting resort options, and best of all, David has already paid the first month's fee. You can move in next week. I'm not going anywhere, Bruna. I kept my voice calm, but firm. She blinked, confused, as if she couldn't process the possibility of receiving a no. But mother-in-law, we've already finalized it. You'll lose the enrollment money if you don't go, then lose it. I turned back to washing dishes, deliberately turning my back on her. I didn't ask, I didn't authorize, and I won't go. I felt her anger radiating from my back. She stood there for a few seconds, breathing heavily before gathering the brochures with abrupt movements. You're ungrateful. David only wants what's best for you, and you insist on this ridiculous stubbornness. Her voice rose an octave. But fine. When you fall alone in this old house and lie on the floor for days with no one to help, don't come crying. She slammed the door so hard that the wall clock stopped for a few seconds before resuming its ticking. Miriam, who had heard everything from the bedroom, appeared with her phone in hand, recorded, veiled threat, psychological coercion, attempted abandonment of a vulnerable person. She smiled with grim satisfaction. Mr. Davies will love this. On Saturday, 3 days before the deadline, David appeared with papers, many papers. They were powers of attorney, authorizations, asset transfers, all disguised in complicated legal language that an ordinary person wouldn't understand. "Mum, I need you to sign this. It's just inventory bureaucracy." He placed the documents in front of me, offering an expensive pen. "Mr. Davies sent it, registry office stuff, you know." I took the papers, slowly read each line, each paragraph, and there, hidden on page 3, under the innocent title, Assignment of Succession Rights, was the trap. I would be giving up any future claim to Augustus's inheritance. "Mr. Davies sent this?" I looked into David's eyes. He did. I spoke to him yesterday. A lie. "Mr. Davies had called me last night to say David had tried to schedule a meeting, but he had invented an excuse about being away. I'll read it carefully, and then I'll sign." I put the papers away. "Mom, it's urgent. It needs to be today to file on Monday. Then it will have to wait until Monday." I closed the folder, crossed my arms. I don't sign anything without reading it properly. I saw his jaw clench, his nostrils flare, his eyes darken in the way Augustus used to get when contradicted. "Are you defying me?" His voice came out low, dangerous. "I'm exercising my right to read what I sign. You know what your problem is?" David stood up abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. "You never knew your place. You always thought you had a right to an opinion, to a decision, to a voice. But the truth is, you were always just that, Augustus's wife, and now that he's dead, you're nothing anymore." Each word was a precise slap. "Nothing," he repeated, savoring the cruelty. "You think you built something, that you helped with something? You were the luxury maid, Mum, the one who cooked, cleaned, and kept quiet, while real men made the money come in." I remained motionless. Not even Miriam, who had come down hearing the argument, dared to interfere. "Then I'll speak in a way that even you can understand. Either you sign these papers, or I'll sue you for obstruction of inventory. And, believe me, I have very, very good solicitors. Solicitors who will prove that you don't have the mental capacity to manage assets. They'll institutionalize you by force if necessary." He leaned close to my face. "You'll end your days drooling in a fifth-rate care home, taking controlled medication and watching soap operas. Is that what you want?" The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Then, for the first time in 67 years, I smiled at a threat. I smiled because I knew what he didn't know. I smiled because there were only 3 days left. I smiled because every word of that speech was being recorded by the device Mr. Davies had discreetly installed in the living room light fixture. "You know, David," my voice came out calm, almost soft. "You are absolutely right. I never knew my place, because my place was never beneath anyone's feet." I took the papers and slowly tore them, one by one. "Now get out of my house and only come back when you learn that respect isn't inherited, it's earned." David left my house that Saturday with a hatred so palpable that I could taste its bitterness in the air. He didn't slam the door this time, he simply walked out in silence. And that silence was much more terrifying than any shout. Bruna waited for him in the car, looking at her phone. I saw through the window as he got in, hit the steering wheel twice, and sped off, tires squealing on the asphalt. She looked back at my house, and even from a distance, I could see her smile. It wasn't a smile of victory, it was the smile of someone planning something. "They'll be back." Miriam was beside me, watching the car disappear around the corner. "And they'll be back with everything." "I know. 3 days left, Teresa. 3 days until the clause deadline. Can you bear it?" I looked at that woman I barely knew 2 weeks ago, who was now my only real ally in this silent war. Miriam had lit a light in a hallway I thought ended in complete darkness. "I'll bear it." My voice came out firmer than I felt, because I had no choice. But in truth, for the first time in a long time, I had a choice, and I was choosing not to bend. That night, Mr. Davies appeared discreetly through the back door, carrying a laptop and a serious expression that hinted at a family crime. "Mrs. Davies, I need you to see this." He opened the computer on the kitchen table, adjusted his glasses, and pressed play. The screen showed my living room, a discreet angle captured by the hidden camera in the light fixture. And there was David, in high definition, saying every venomous word he had spat hours earlier. You were the luxury maid, Mum, the one who cooked, cleaned, and kept quiet, while real men made the money come in. Hearing it a second time didn't hurt any less, but this time there was a layer of detachment, as if I were watching someone else's story, a woman who had been humiliated for too long. I also have the recordings of the will reading, the meeting with the appraisers, Bruna's visit with the care home brochures. Mr. Davies ran his fingers over the trackpad, showing folder after folder of audio and video files. 27 days of documentation, 27 days of your son proving exactly the kind of character your husband feared he had. Augustus knew. It wasn't a question. It was a painful realization. He knew what David was really like. He knew? Mr. Davies carefully closed the laptop, like closing a coffin. The money diversions were the last straw, but Augustus had been observing his son's behavior for years, the arrogance, the contempt, the lack of empathy. He told me something I'll never forget. Davies, I've created a monster, and now I need to ensure that this monster doesn't destroy the only person who has always been by my side. The tears came unbidden. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of validation, of finally being seen by someone who mattered. Miriam hugged me by the shoulder, squeezed tight. 3 days left. Mr. Davies put the laptop back in the folder. On Monday, 30 days will have passed since Augustus's death. I have called a new meeting at the office for a supplementary reading of the will. David doesn't know what it's about, but he will attend. I sent the official summons via the registry office. He has no choice. And if he suspects, he won't. The solicitor allowed himself a discreet smile. He thinks this meeting is for you to finally sign the inheritance waivers. I implied as much in the summons. He will arrive confident, victorious, and he will leave destroyed, Miriam completed, without a shred of pity in her voice. On Sunday, the day before the final meeting, the house was eerily silent. Neither David nor Bruna showed any signs of life. No calls, no surprise visits, nothing. It was the calm before the storm, and I could feel the electricity in the air. I spent the day organizing the house. Not because it needed it, the house was impeccable, but because I needed something to do with my hands to keep from going crazy with anxiety. I polished Grandmother Matilda's sideboard for the 3rd time when I realized I wasn't just cleaning wood. I was saying goodbye, because no matter what happened tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. Either I would lose my son definitively, or he would learn a lesson so harsh that he might never forgive me for delivering it. Which would be worse? At night, Miriam insisted I eat something. She prepared a vegetable soup, placed it in front of me with that authority that doesn't accept argument. You need to be strong tomorrow. She sat on the other side of the table, her eyes tired but determined. It's going to be difficult, Teresa. Very difficult. Seeing your son crumble before your eyes isn't easy, even when he deserves it. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? The question came out small, vulnerable. Miriam didn't answer immediately. She took a sip of water, looked out the kitchen window where the full moon illuminated the garden, and finally looked at me with that wisdom of someone who has faced many battles. The right thing is rarely the easy thing. Your husband gave you a choice, but he also gave you a responsibility. To teach your son that actions have consequences, that you can't spend your whole life disrespecting those who love you and expect to get away with it. She reached across the table, covering my hand. You're not punishing your son, Teresa. You're saving what's left of humanity in him, if there is any. I slept little that night. I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, at that damp patch in the shape of a bird that Augustus never fixed. And suddenly I understood. He hadn't fixed it on purpose. That bird was a silent reminder that some things we don't need to fix, some things we need to learn to live with, or to leave behind. At 6 a.m. on Monday, I got up, showered, and carefully chose my outfit. No black. I had worn too much black at the wake. I chose a navy blue dress I had bought years ago and never had the courage to wear. Augustus had said navy blue was the color of an important woman. Today, I would be an important woman. Miriam drove me to Mr. Davies's office. Neither of us spoke during the journey. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. I just held tightly to my bag strap, taking deep breaths at each traffic light, preparing myself for the moment that would define the rest of my life. David's car was already in the car park when we arrived. A brand new black Mercedes he had bought the week before, paid for with his dead father's money. He stood at the building's entrance, checking his watch impatiently. Bruna beside him, chewing gum, bored. When they saw me getting out of the car, David smiled. A wide, confident smile, like someone who thinks they've won. "Good morning, Mum. I see you've finally decided to be reasonable." I didn't answer. I just walked towards the entrance, Miriam by my side, like an emotional bodyguard. Mr. Davies waited for us in the lobby, his face neutral, professional. "Good morning, everyone. Please, come up. We have a lot to discuss." In the lift, David whistled softly. Bruna checked her nails. I just counted the floors. 1, 2, 3. Each floor was a step closer to the truth. 4, 5, 6. Each number on the panel was a beat of my accelerating heart. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and finally 12. The doors opened to the corridor leading to the office, where my life would be redefined. Where my son would learn that underestimating a silent woman is the most expensive mistake a man can make. Where justice would finally cease to be just a beautiful word. The meeting room was exactly as I remembered it. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, large windows showing the city below, small, distant, oblivious to the drama that was about to unfold inside. David slumped into his chair with that owner-of-the-world posture, his legs spread, his arms stretched over the back of the chair beside him. Bruna sat next to him, crossed her legs, and started fiddling with her phone, as if this were just another boring meeting she was obliged to attend. Miriam positioned herself strategically beside me. Mr. Davies went to the door, locked it with a discreet click that made David raise an eyebrow but not comment. Then he returned to his chair, opened that same worn brown folder, and adjusted his glasses with meticulous movements. "Good." David clapped his hands on his thighs, impatient. "Let's get this over with. I brought new documents for my mother to sign. Simpler this time, no complicated legal jargon." He pushed a folder across the table towards me. "Mr. Davies, can you confirm everything is in order?" "Actually, Mr. David, we won't be needing those documents." Mr. Davies didn't even look at the folder. "Today's meeting has another purpose." Silence. David blinked, confused. Bruna put down her phone. "What do you mean, another purpose?" His voice had lost some of its arrogance. "We are here for the supplementary reading of your father's will." Mr. Davies opened the folder, took out the same envelope I had seen days ago. There is a second page that was not read at the first meeting. For legal and contractual reasons, it could only be revealed after 30 full days had passed since the death. I saw the color drain from David's face. Not completely, not yet, but enough for me to know. He was starting to understand that something was wrong. "Second page? What's this all about?" He leaned forward, trying to appear merely curious, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. Dad didn't tell me about any second page, because he shouldn't have. "Mr. Davies replied with that professional calm of someone who had seen many storms. "Your father drafted this additional clause 3 months before he passed away, with express instructions that it only be revealed after a period of observation." "Observation of what?" Bruna had also leaned forward now, her fake nails nervously tapping on the table. "Of Mr. David's behavior towards his mother." The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. David gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Behavior? What on earth does that mean?" Mr. Davies didn't answer, just began to read, his voice firm and clear, without emotion. "Additional clause to the will of Augustus Henry Davies. Whereas I have reason to believe that my son may not treat his mother with the respect and dignity she deserves after my passing, I establish the following. Should it be proven through credible documentation collected by the testamentary executor that David Augustus Davies demonstrated unworthy, disrespectful, coercive, or abusive behavior towards Teresa Alice Davies, within 30 days of my passing, the entire inheritance left by me shall be fully reverted to my wife." The silence that followed was deafening. To my son, in this case, only the symbolic sum of £15,000 shall be allocated, the same I initially designated for his mother, as a reminder that respect and dignity are not inherited but earned. David jumped up, his chair almost toppling backwards. "This is ridiculous!" His shout echoed through the walls. "This can't be legal. It can't be valid. It is completely legal." Miriam spoke for the first time, her solicitor's voice cutting the air like a sharp blade. "Wills can contain conditional clauses, and this one was drafted, notarized, and registered with all necessary formalities. Unworthy behavior." David ran his hands through his hair. He was starting to sweat. Who defines what unworthy behavior is? That's too subjective. Not when there's documentation. Mr. Davies turned on the laptop that was on the table. "According to instructions left by your father, I was appointed testamentary executor with powers to observe and document your interactions with Mrs. Teresa during the 30-day period." "You spied on me?" David's voice rose an octave. "Documented?" Mr. Davies corrected, pressing play. The first scene that appeared on the screen was from the will reading. David laughing, guffawing at the £15,000 left for me. The words echoed through the room again, now amplified by the loudspeakers. £15,000? That wouldn't even pay for Bruna's fake nails. Bruna sank into her chair, pale. The video continued. The meeting with the appraisers. David cataloging my furniture as merchandise. Bruna's visit with the care home brochures. And, finally, the scene from Saturday. David calling me a luxury maid, saying I was nothing, threatening to have me institutionalized by force. Every word, every gesture, every expression of contempt documented in high definition. When the video ended, David was white as paper. Bruna had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. 27 days of documentation. Mr. Davies closed the laptop. 27 days of behavior that characterizes, according to the legal analysis I requested from 3 independent specialists, psychological abuse, coercion, attempted misappropriation of assets, and threat of unlawful imprisonment. I was angry. People say things when they're angry. David was desperate now, his hands trembling. "This can't count. I didn't know I was being recorded." "Exactly." Miriam stood up, approached the table with the posture of a prosecutor she had once been. "You didn't know. So you revealed who you really are when you think no one is looking. And that's what your father wanted to discover. Not the son you pretended to be in front of him, but the man you became when you thought there were no consequences." David turned to me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw real panic in his eyes. Mum, you're not going to let this happen, are you? I'm your son." I was just nervous about Dad's death, you know how it is." It wasn't personal. He was pleading now, his voice failing. "Please, you can't do this to me." I looked at that 40-year-old man, sweating, desperate, pleading, and I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger who had learned all the wrong lessons in life. "You're right, David. I can't do this to you." My voice came out calm, serene. "You did this to yourself." "No." He slammed the table. "I'm going to sue. I'm going to overturn this ridiculous will. I have rights. I'm an only child." "You can try." "Mr. Davies gathered the documents with irritating tranquility. "But you will lose, and you will spend the £15,000 that will remain on legal fees. Your choice." Bruna stood up, grabbing her bag. "David, let's go. We'll sort this out with other solicitors, real solicitors." She shot a venomous glance at Mr. Davies, but David didn't move. He was looking at me with an expression that oscillated between hatred and disbelief, as if he couldn't process that the invisible woman he had trodden on his whole life had just turned the tables. "How many years, Mum?" His voice came out hoarse. "How many years have you been waiting for this, planning to destroy me?" "I didn't plan anything, David. Your father planned it. I just let you show who you really were." I stood up, picked up my bag, and if it's any consolation, I hope that £15,000 teaches you more about dignity than £160 million ever would. I walked towards the door. Miriam unlocked it, opened it for me. Before leaving, I looked back one last time. David remained seated, his head in his hands. Bruna was on the phone, probably already calling solicitors, calculating if there was still a way to save the money, and I felt nothing. Neither joy for the victory, nor sadness for the loss, just a strange emptiness where a mother's love should have been. Perhaps that was what it meant to finally be free. The following 3 months were an emotional roller coaster I wasn't prepared for. David tried to contest the will, as promised. He hired an expensive law firm, the kind with an English name and a five-star hotel reception. But Mr. Davies was right. They had no case. The clause was solid, the documentation irrefutable, and 3 independent experts confirmed that the recorded behavior constituted psychological abuse. The judge, a gray-haired woman with the tired eyes of someone who had seen much family ingratitude, denied the appeal in the first instance. David appealed, lost again. It cost him exactly £14,700 in legal fees. He had £300 left from his father's inheritance. Bruna abandoned him in the second week after the court decision. There was no farewell letter, no drama. She simply packed her bags while he was at the solicitor's office. She took the jewelry he had given her, the car that was in her name, and disappeared. She left a note glued to the fridge with 3 words. It was fun while it lasted. I learned about this through Mrs. Miriam, who learned through the building gossip where David lived, who happened to be a cousin of one of her clients. Female information networks are more efficient than any intelligence service. I felt neither pity nor joy, just a cold realization. He had chosen a woman who loved him for what he had, not for what he was. And when the having ended, the being was not enough. As for me, for the first time in 67 years, I needed to discover who I was when I wasn't being defined by someone else. I was no longer Augustus's wife, I was no longer David's mother, I was just Teresa. And Teresa needed to reinvent herself. The first thing I did was renovate the house. Not because it needed it, the structure was solid, but because I needed it. I called a young architect, a girl with large glasses and colorful hair, who listened to me for 3 hours before drawing a single line. "You want to turn memories into new beginnings?" she had said, looking at the rooms with eyes that saw possibilities. "Let's do this." We painted the walls. No beige and white, the colors Augustus preferred because they were neutral and enhanced the property's value. I chose cobalt blue for the living room, a deep blue that reminded me of the sea I had never seen up close. Gold for the details, frames, doorknobs, the skirting board the architect suggested, and which made all the difference. The kitchen got English tiles in shades of yellow and orange, colors that seemed to hold the sun inside the house even on cloudy days. Grandmother Matilda's sideboard remained in the same place, but now restored, varnished, shining with renewed dignity. My mother's chandelier was cleaned piece by piece, each crystal pendant polished until it reflected light like tiny stars. And where once hung the wedding portrait, Augustus and I, young and full of illusions, I placed a photograph of myself at 25, before the marriage, when I still dreamed of being an architect. That young woman in the portrait had bright eyes. I had forgotten I was once like that. At 67, I enrolled in the Open University for seniors, not to complete architecture. That dream had been left behind, and that was perfectly fine. But I took a course in art history, another in urban gardening, and a third in women's rights that Miriam insisted I take. "You never know when you'll need it," she had said with that knowing smile. I made real friendships. Not the superficial friendships of a businessman's wife, where you smile at dinners and never reveal anything true, but friendships of people who recognize each other in pain and overcoming. Women like me, who had spent decades being invisible, and were learning to take up space. Helena, 71, widow of a doctor who openly cheated and left half his inheritance to his mistress. Sandra, 65, divorced after discovering her husband had a second family in another city. Beatrice, 69, who never married because she cared for her sick mother until she died, and when she was finally free, she was too old to start. We met every Tuesday afternoon in my cobalt blue living room. We drank tea from cups I bought just for this, fine porcelain with golden details, and told our stories. We laughed, we cried, we rebuilt our narratives in a way that made sense to us, not to the men who defined us. I planted a garden in the backyard, roses, jasmine, lavender, flowers Augustus never allowed because they attract bees and are too much work. Now the bees came, and the work was mine, and there was something deeply satisfying about getting my hands dirty with soil and seeing something beautiful grow because of my care. 6 months after the meeting at Mr. Davies's office, David appeared. He didn't announce his visit. He simply rang the doorbell on a Saturday morning, and when I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight. His beard was unshaven. His clothes were simple, a faded t-shirt, worn jeans, none of the Italian suits and leather shoes. "Hi, Mum." His voice came out hoarse, as if not used much lately. "David." I didn't invite him in. Not yet. We stood there in the doorway, an awkward silence stretching between us like old chewing gum. He swallowed hard. "I needed to talk to you." Then talk. He looked around. At the empty street. At his feet. Anywhere but me. "I got a job in an accounting firm. Administrative assistant. Minimum wage and a half." A pause. "It's humiliating. Who was once a company director. Now I file papers and make coffee for people who earn less than I used to spend on lunch." I waited. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. But he took a deep breath. "It's honest. And at the end of the day, when I lie down in the tiny apartment I share with 2 other guys, at least I sleep without feeling like I stole from someone." Something stirred in my chest. Small, cautious. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe it was the beginning of something similar. "Why did you come here, David?" He finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Genuine shame. Because I spent 6 months blaming you, blaming Dad, blaming the world. And this morning I woke up and realized the only one to blame was me. His hands trembled. I was a horrible son. I wasn't just ungrateful. I was cruel. And you didn't deserve any of it. Tears began to stream down his face. They weren't manipulative tears. I knew those already. These were tears of someone who had finally seen the monster in the mirror. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it, nor did I come to ask for money because I learned that money I didn't earn is worth nothing. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I came to say that I understood the lesson, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to become the son you deserve to have. I remained silent for a time that seemed eternal. Then I stepped aside. "Come in, I'll make coffee." It wasn't complete forgiveness. It wasn't immediate reconciliation. But it was a door opening slowly, cautiously, because in the end I discovered that justice isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. And sometimes, restoring means giving someone the chance to rebuild who they are, even if it hurts, even if it's scary, even if you never go back to being mother and son as before, because that before was broken from the start. 2 years have passed since that morning David appeared at my door. 2 years that taught me that rebuilding bridges is a slow, delicate job, requiring patience from both sides. David didn't become the perfect fairy tale son. He didn't move back in with me. He didn't call me every day. He didn't pretend that years of cruelty could be erased with a few apologies. But he showed up once a week, sometimes twice, always bringing something simple. A loaf of bread from the bakery I liked, flowers from the market, or simply his own presence. We talked for real, not those superficial, "How are you?" followed by "I'm fine" conversations, but true conversations, where he told me about his work. He had been promoted to financial analyst. He earned enough now to have his own apartment, small, but his own. And I told him about my classes, my gardening projects, the friends who had become my new family. Once, he looked at the cobalt blue wall in the living room and said, "It looks nice. I never imagined you liked such vibrant colors." "Neither did I replied, serving coffee. "I spent 42 years not knowing who I was, besides wife and mother. I'm discovering it little by little." He was silent for a moment, stirring his sugar into his coffee with slow movements. "I'm sorry I stole that from you." "You didn't steal it, David. I gave it away." That's the difference I learned. I sat in the armchair opposite him, the one that was now my favorite, emerald green velvet, bought from a vintage furniture store. No one can make us invisible without our permission. I chose to disappear because I thought that's what a good wife, a good mother did. I was wrong. It was the most honest conversation we had had to date. On David's 70th birthday, he was 42, he showed up with a carefully wrapped gift. When I opened it, I found a rosewood photo frame, clearly handmade, with simple but careful carvings. "I made it in a woodworking course," he explained, blushing slightly. I thought, well, you always valued things that carry history, so I wanted to start creating new stories, good stories. Inside the photo frame was a picture of us taken 3 weeks earlier in the garden. I was watering the lavender. He was in the background, helping to prune the rose bushes, both smiling. Not posed smiles, but genuine smiles, the kind that happen when you're simply living a good moment. "Thank you, son." And this time the word son didn't hurt. Miriam continued to be my anchor. We had dinner together at least twice a week, alternating between my house and hers. She had started dating a 75-year-old widower she had met on a cruise to the Canary Islands that we took together. Something I would never have done alone, but which Miriam insisted we needed to experience. "Teresa, we spent our whole lives taking care of everyone. It's time to take care of ourselves." She was right. The cruise was liberating. Seeing the sea for the first time at 69 made me understand how many things I had left undone because I was busy being useful to others. We returned with suitcases full of shells, tanned skin, and plans to do it every year. The Tuesday friends, Helena, Sandra, and Beatrice, became confidantes, sisters I chose. Helena had opened a small bakery with the inheritance she got through legal action. Sandra had gone back to painting, something she abandoned at 20 when her husband said art didn't pay the bills. Beatrice, 69, never married because she cared for her sick mother until she died. And when she was free, she was too old to start. All of us were flourishing, at an age society says we should be wilting. Mr. Davies became a friend too. I discovered he was a widower. He had lost his wife to the same cancer that took Augustus. We understood each other in a silent way, the way people who have survived profound losses manage to understand. One afternoon over coffee, he told me that Augustus had cried the day he discovered David's embezzlement. He blamed himself. He said he had raised a son who valued money more than character because he himself had spent his life chasing money. Mr. Davies stirred his coffee, looking into the dark liquid as if reading the past there. "The clause in the will was not revenge, Mrs. Davies. It was a father's last attempt to save his son, to give him a shake strong enough to wake him up." "Did it work?" I said, thinking of today's David, different from the arrogant man who had pushed me at the wake. "It hurt, but it worked." 6 months ago, I received an unexpected call. It was from a foundation that supported women in vulnerable situations. They wanted to know if I would be willing to share my story at an event on female empowerment in old age. My first reaction was to refuse. Who would want to hear the story of an old woman who took 67 years to find her own voice? But Miriam, as always, convinced me. Precisely for that reason, Teresa, because there are thousands of women out there thinking it's too late, that they've passed their prime, that they should accept crumbs because they've lived too long. I went and spoke to an audience of 200 women. I told my story. The invisible wife, the ungrateful son, the husband who only saw my worth when he was dying, and the rebuilding, piece by piece, of a woman who thought she was finished and discovered she was just beginning. When I finished, the silence was absolute for 3 seconds. Then, the hall erupted in applause. Women cried, others smiled. Some came to hug me afterwards, whispering, "Thank you," as if I had given them permission to start over too. That night, returning home in an Uber, I looked out the window and saw the city illuminated, the same city where I had lived for 67 years, but which seemed different now, more colorful, more alive. Or perhaps it was I who was seeing with new eyes. When I got home, I went straight to the bedroom. I lay in bed, looked at the ceiling, where that damp patch in the shape of a bird had remained for years. It was no longer there. During the renovation, the architect had fixed the leak, treated the infiltration. The ceiling was impeccable, white, unmarked, and I realized I didn't miss the bird, because it no longer needed to be on the ceiling. It had finally learned to fly. If this story touched something in you, if you recognized in Teresa the silent strength that we often don't know we have, leave your comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. And most importantly, what lesson did you take from this story? Because in the end, this is not just Teresa's story. It's the story of all women who were called just a housewife, just a mother, just a wife, and who one day discovered that there is no just when you speak of a woman who chooses not to disappear anymore. Like this video if you believe it's never too late to start over. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of real women facing real challenges, finding strengths they didn't even know they had. And remember, respect is not inherited, It's earned. But dignity? That you already have. You just need to remember it until the next story. And may your story also have a new beginning, no matter how old you are. Teresa took 67 years to fly. How long will you wait?